Everyone, I'm Ruth McKee, Project Director with the Hospitality and Tourism Skills Network, or HATS for short, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar on Wellbeing, a layered approach to mental health, as part of our Recruitment and Retention Webinar Series that's been brought to you by HATS and supported by Tourism NI. Staffing issues, as we're all too aware, continue to be a major concern for the sector, and it's a core focus for the work of HATS, which is an employer-led network that's supported by Invest NI, and we bring together employers from across the industry together with key partners in government and education, with a collective focus on addressing talent attraction and retention issues in the sector through collaboration. As part of our activity, this webinar series has been developed and has been delivered to help businesses in their efforts to recruit and retain a sustainable workforce, but also to support the adoption and implementation of our Hospitality and Tourism Commitment, which is a voluntary code of conduct which has been launched by HATS to improve the attractiveness of hospitality and tourism as a provider of good quality employment and a great place to work. The commitment covers critical areas such as providing good quality training, work-life balance, and wider employee support, which this webinar series and the others will dive into in much more detail. So for this session, we're putting the spotlight on the area of mental health and employee well-being, looking at why mental health is a priority for business, your obligations as an employer in this area, and how you can support your team. And I'm delighted to welcome Rachel Power, who has recently been appointed as Works Manager at Action Mental Health to lend her expertise on this subject. Rachel, I'm delighted you can join us, and I'll hand over to you now. Thank you.
Thanks, Roisin. Yes, I'm delighted to be here and speaking to you about this really important aspect of mental health within the workplace. And to get us started, it's always good to define and know exactly what we're talking about. So what is mental health? And why is it important for you as employers? And very often when the media or other outlets are talking about mental health, what they mean is mental ill health. So the two terms are kind of used synonymously. But in reality, when we are saying mental health is something that we all have, same as physical health. So the World Health Organization definition is mental health is a state of well-being in which every individual recognizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and are able to make a contribution to their community. So that's what we're all kind of aiming towards. We all want to be able to cope with those normal everyday stresses, and we want to be able to make sure that we are contributing to our communities, to our workplaces, because that's really good for our self-esteem. And we really want our employees to feel like they're making a difference, that they are contributing, and that they can cope with the everyday stresses of their role. So when we think about how we all have mental health, that doesn't mean that we are all suffering from mental ill health, but we like to think of it as a spectrum that we are all moving on for different reasons, and we'll be in different parts of the spectrum at different times in our lives. And for some of us, we can move across 3 or 4 of these areas of the spectrum, maybe in a very short space of time, or maybe for some people, it might be that they don't realize that they are moving to the more struggling ill health end of the spectrum. But we all do have mental health, and just because we're maybe at the struggling end of the spectrum, that doesn't mean that we won't be able to go to work and contribute effectively in our jobs. And the same for the healthy side of the spectrum. That doesn't mean that we won't experience sadness or disappointment or fear or anxiety. We all have the capacity to hold a lot of different emotions. And sometimes we can think of mental health and mental ill health in very black and white terms, but it's a spectrum. There's just a lot of grey and a lot of nuance that we are moving across all the time for very different reasons. And when we think about it in the context of the workplace, it may be that there's external factors are making an impact on our mental health and moving us along the spectrum, but we bring that into the workplace. So it is something that employers need to be aware of how their employees are doing, how they're coping. and what they can do to help support them so that they can contribute effectively to their teams. And as well as it being a spectrum, then there's also a mental health continuum. And I think this is even more important for employers to think about, about how this spectrum can impact their employees. So if you look at the top right quadrant, a person with no mental illness or disorder and positive mental health, great. Then the one below, a person with no diagnosed mental illness or disorder, but who has poor mental health. And then to the left, a person with a diagnosis of a serious mental illness and who has poor mental health. And then up above again, a person with a diagnosis of a serious mental illness, but who copes well and has positive mental health. So you will have employees that are in all four of those quadrants, and maybe some will move about, but still be able to, as in the top left-hand corner, they are still able to come to work. They may have a diagnosis, but they're in a place where they're having positive mental health. And whenever I deliver training sessions, I do like to share a bit of my own experience, and I have been in all four of those quadrants and still able to come to work and still able to effectively do my job. Sometimes there's needed to be some adjustments, some slight changes to help me stay within my role, but that's been something that my employers were happy to do because they knew that it would help me get back into one of the more positive quadrants where I wouldn't need any support to be able to fulfill my role. So you may not know where your employees are in this quadrant unless they're specifically coming and speaking to you about it, but it is something to be really aware of, that you don't know where an employee is. And this is again why mental health is so important for the workplace, to try and encourage those conversations, especially between staff members and direct line managers, to make sure that those lines of communication are very open, so that people can raise things with their manager. If I hadn't been able to raise something with my manager, it may have meant that I would have stayed in one of those bottom quadrants, had to take time off, things would have progressed. Whereas being able to ask for a few small changes, I was able to keep working with very little difference to my role. So when we think of mental health and why it's important for the workplace, we spend so much of our day in work, so much of our time with colleagues and with other staff members. And sometimes things within work can affect our mental health. Sometimes it's things outside of work that affect our mental health, but then affect our job role. And then it becomes a duty of care as employers. If somebody is having issues that are affecting how they can do their job, then the employers do need to be aware of that and be able to either make some changes or offer support, or see what is the best option for these staff members, because we want to keep our staff, we want to retain them for longer periods of time. We want them to be contributing effectively and to be benefiting and enjoying their job, and really working towards creating a positive atmosphere within our staff teams and within our organisations. And a few statistics about health and wellbeing in the workplace, and these figures are from 2020, but they haven't really changed in the last couple of years. And 59% of the most common causes of long-term absence are mental ill health. So that is a large proportion of the workforce who are having to take time off because of mental ill health. And it may have been that some of those issues could have been addressed by employers to try and keep their staff working and contributing. And again, things like stress is another 46% very linked, and it may be that people with those other issues listed there, acute medical conditions, etc., it may be that mental health then is also playing a part in their issues and why they're still off, because it's just all so connected. So it's definitely something that we want employers to be aware of. And really, we're always encouraging employers to have the mindset of physical health and mental health are equally as important. So things like if you have a first aider for your physical health within the organisation, then also consider, let's get some mental health first aiders as well. can make a big difference. Because for most of us with our physical health, we're very happy to talk about it. I have a bad back at the minute, and I will talk to anybody that will listen about how terrible it is to have a dodgy back. And we're very happy to have it. For some of it's our go-to topic of conversation, listing off our ailments. And normally we're very happy to have those conversations because it's very relatable. We've all probably had a cold. We're all well versed in talking about COVID. And so we're generally happy to talk about it. Even some of the more serious health issues, we still feel comfortable to bring it up with colleagues or to talk about it with colleagues, because there's very little stigma around having physical ill health. And as well, we know the script. Whenever we start having these conversations, we kind of know what's expected of us to say. We know what we can and we can't say. And we feel comfortable in having these conversations. Whereas with mental health, after I'd moaned for 10 minutes about my bad back, if I then started talking about my anxiety, the conversation might not feel as comfortable. There's a lot of stigma, especially within the workplace. If somebody opens up or shares about their depression or their anxiety, does that mean colleagues are going to think of them differently? Are colleagues going to maybe think, well, I don't want them on my shift, I don't want them on my team, are they a liability? So there's a lot of stigma around sharing about mental health. It may also be that the other person, there's no script for this, we don't know what to say. That can then make the conversation even more awkward. We don't want to upset somebody, we don't want to make it worse. And as well, our own frame of reference around what we think mental health is. And that can come from all kinds of places, social media, our own experiences, our families, our communities. So we bring our own projections of what mental health is into those conversations as well. And again, we don't want to upset anybody. We don't want to make it worse. So very often then we just don't talk about our mental health or our mental ill health the same way that we do as our physical health. But again, we're always encouraging organisations to try and create an open atmosphere where people, maybe not with their colleagues all the time around the water cooler talking about their mental health, but we definitely want to encourage employers to be thinking of how can we make sure in the line management relationship that employees know that they can talk about their mental health, they can talk about these more pastoral issues, especially if they're going to make an impact or affect their job. And whenever I was thinking about some things specifically related to hospitality and tourism, normally when I'm speaking to organisations, it's maybe something that I have some experience in and some kind of, I can relate to maybe what you're talking about, but I've never worked in hospitality and tourism. I worked in a butcher's for a summer, but I don't think that counts, that's retail. So I had to ask for some advice around, here's some things that I thought would be specific to the industry, and maybe we can unpick a few of these as we go through the rest of the presentation. And a lot of these have already been kind of talked about already with Roisin's introduction. So issues that your managers will be facing: high turnover of staff, young workforce, being customer facing, dealing with customers all the time, burnout, drugs and alcohol. So most of those, there is a link, for some of them very directly to mental health. For some of them, maybe it's another factor of dealing with customers, maybe can impact somebody's mental health negatively. Burnout definitely linked to mental health. But what is certainly a very common factor for all of them is the atmosphere within the organisation towards mental health, towards being able to talk about mental health, towards the morale of their staff is very important for all of them. You want to keep and retain staff. Obviously, that makes more sense from a business point of view, more consistent teamwork, especially if you have good staff members, you want to keep them. For the young workforce, do you want to get to a point where you're maybe 17-year-old and you're keeping them the whole way through university, or you're keeping them and you're training them and they're progressing through the organisation? working somewhere that has a really good atmosphere, has really good support for staff members, goes a long way to keeping those staff. And obviously, this is probably very idealistic, but it's certainly something to always be working towards and thinking about. Drugs and alcohol obviously isn't something that we specifically as a mental health charity can really speak to, but we wanted to include it to just highlight that we recognise that it is something that is a big issue within this sector. And I have some signposting support that I can offer at the end. But again, they can all be kind of tied in and definitely making an impact on your employees' mental health. And very often, especially for managers, they can feel that they don't know how to have those more sensitive or more pastoral conversations. And it may be then that they start trying to avoid them, or their staff and their team pick up on the fact, oh, I can't talk to my line manager about this, just put the head down and keep going. And again, some statistics around being able to speak to managers. So 31% there, the middle bar graph, 31% think managers can have sensitive conversations and signpost to expert help, which is great. But then what about all the rest? So we really want to equip and empower managers to know that they can have these conversations. And yes, they might be uncomfortable. And yes, somebody might cry. It might not be the most pleasant 10 minutes of your life, but they're really important to have. And very often we'll have managers say, I've never been trained in this. I'm very trained and very skilled in my job, but I've never had any training around how to best have these kind of conversations. So one of our training programs is specifically, it's called Mindful Manager, and it looks specifically at how we can empower and equip managers to know that they can have these kind of conversations, so that more than 31% of employees can feel that they can speak to their managers. Another statistic there, 25% of managers can spot the early warning signs of mental health. We would never be encouraging managers to be diagnosing team members or anything like that, but it certainly is a good opportunity if they notice within a team member, oh, you've been very withdrawn for the last couple of weeks, or your standard of your work has slipped the last couple of weeks, or I've just noticed you're not engaging the same way with your colleagues or with your clients for the last couple of weeks. And that is definitely something that you can raise with an employee, and then can be a good opener for some of those conversations, because very often it's getting the conversation started is the hard part. So we're always asked for advice and kind of tips and tools. And as I said, the training is chock full of really practical advice and help, but just a very simple flow chart that we use approaching colleagues and staff around having these difficult conversations, and some very kind of common sense things to think about as well, of where are you going to have the conversation. Don't have it in the middle of a busy kitchen at lunchtime. Don't have it in the middle of the office. If you can, try and find somewhere that is more private, more quiet, and it's still appropriate, where you can have this conversation with no distractions. Again, things like giving good eye contact, making sure that you're actually listening to what they're saying. So not kind of being answering emails at the same time, but also as well, listen to what the person is saying rather than what you expect them to say. Again, trying to remove what you think might be wrong or what you think might be happening, because it could be something totally left field. So really make sure that you're actively listening to what they're saying. And you can just open the conversation with, how are you doing? How are things? And see what that opens up. But definitely do clarify why you've asked. I've noticed a change, because that really validates that employee. I am worthy of being noticed that my work has changed. My manager notices when something is different. My manager values me enough to have this conversation. Doesn't mean that they might not still get upset, or they might not, it still might be an awkward conversation, but that validation is really important. And then again, giving them time to explain, making sure that Yeah, that you're really listening, giving lots of space and time for them to tell you what's happening. Then offering help. Is there anything I can do to help? And we'll talk a little bit more in a couple of slides about reasonable adjustments. But we always encourage employers to think creatively around their reasonable adjustments. And obviously, for some jobs, there will be very little that can be changed to help support a staff member. But again, it's beneficial not only for that staff member to, if there are changes that can be made, helps them feel really valued and supported, but also that ripples out to the wider team, to the wider organisation. Again, looking at creating that positive atmosphere. If they've done it for one staff member, I know that they'll do it for me. Or, oh, I covered some shifts whenever somebody else had to reduce their workload. Now it's happened to me. That's okay. This is just the atmosphere within the team. We all, help out when needed, and really that kind of teamwork and that ethos within the organisation. And then finally, the end of the kind of flow chart is signposting. If somebody does need, it's always good to have somebody to speak to if they do need some more support, GP, or especially if your organisation has things that the HR department can help with. Do you have an employee assistance programme? Is there anything, some more training that HR can offer? So as managers, it's always really good to be aware of what support your organisation offers and being able to signpost your staff directly there, as well as external signposting. So it may be that within certain job roles within hospitality and tourism, they are high pressure, and that is what the job role is. So for some roles, there may not be loads of reasonable adjustments that you can make, but just some things to consider. You're wanting to retain staff, you're wanting to keep them, and thinking of, okay, is this really effective and practical, not only for the staff member, but for the organisation? What impact will it have on the wider team? So as much as we're wanting to retain staff and to keep as many staff in their roles and functioning as possible, we do recognise that sometimes there aren't loads of adjustments that can be made. But some things that maybe to consider, if somebody's really struggling being client facing, is there another role that they could look at? If they're really struggling during really busy times, could they only work morning shifts? This is your area of expertise. I'm not going to try and give any more dodgy examples, but just to get thinking that there may be creative ways of implementing reasonable adjustments that could benefit the individual, benefit the organisation, and then rippling out to the wider team. Now, burnout was one of the issues that HATs were kind of flagged up to me as being very prominent within this industry. And you'll not be surprised to know that it's very prominent across the board. Last year, we developed a specific course around burnout and rest, because that was what employers were continually asking us for support and training on. So it is a big issue across the board at the minute. And again, always good. Burnout is having a bit of a moment of, the term is used quite a lot. So it's always good to know, well, what does this word actually mean? So again, the World Health Organization definition, burnout is a psychological syndrome occurring from prolonged chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. So burnout is specific to the workplace. So again, coming back to your duty of care as employers around mental health and around burnout. So it is something that you do need to be aware of, and being aware of what support that you can offer your staff members in relation to it. Now, I'm sure you would all agree, and I can't even begin to imagine the prolonged chronic workplace stress your industry has been under the last 2 years, and that low level, rumbling, continuous anxiety of, am I going to be furloughed? Is my job still going to be there? Is my restaurant going to open again? That is definitely prolonged chronic stress. So I am sure that there is burnout across all levels within your industry, and something that definitely needs to be looked at. Even just, again, recognizing and validating in your staff members, we get it, we know that you are stressed out and burnt out. We are too. Let's look at what we can do to try and support our staff. And that's everybody, that's all levels of staff within the organization. And some statistics around burnout, because again, it's a term that's used quite a lot, but what are the actual kind of hard facts around how burnout is affecting employers and employees? So 1 in 5 said they felt unable to manage stress and pressure in the workplace. It increased for 24% of employees during 2020. The 3 top reported causes of burnout: working longer hours, inability to separate work and personal life, and an uncertain job market. And I imagine for your industry, working longer hours and the uncertain job market have been a big impact the last couple of years. Being furloughed, that uncertainty, that anxiety just always being there is so draining and so debilitating. 46% of UK workers feel more prone to extreme levels of stress, while only 15% feel less prone to extreme levels of stress. And 23% of people knew what plans their employers had in place to help spot signs of chronic stress and burnout in employees. So quite a small percentage. And again, that could be kind of easily addressed in some ways of making sure that your staff know exactly what you as an organisation offer and can do to support them. So if you have mental health first aiders, make sure it's displayed who they are, how people can speak to them, get in touch with them. Or if you have an EAP, an employee assistance program, or what training HR offers, make sure that that's well known. And I think for me, the most interesting statistic around this was 1 in 5 said they felt unable to manage stress and pressure in the workplace. And when we talk about stress, we use a balloon as an example. So a balloon needs some air to inflate, to become a balloon, to achieve its purpose in life of being a balloon. And we're the same. We need some pressures, some healthy pressures to help us get things done, to get us out of bed in the morning, to make sure I was on time to this recording, prepared, ready to go. Those are all healthy stresses. Getting the kids to school on time, getting to work on time, making sure that we have dinner ready. Those are all very healthy stresses that make sure we function. So it's whenever the stress and the pressure is starting to become unmanageable, when there's too much air pumped into the balloon and it's just getting close to exploding. So that's a good analogy to be able to think, well, how much air is in my balloon at the minute? What can I do to release some of that pressure? What can I do to make this more manageable? We're never going to remove all the stress. And again, thinking about the hospitality and tourism sector, I imagine there are a lot of jobs that are stressful, that are high energy, high intensity, and that's the nature of the role. But it's about, well, where are the other external stresses or pressures? Where are those coming from? What can we do to relieve those, to try and make sure that it's kept at a manageable level where we're still achieving what we need to achieve? People are still able to function, but we're not exploding balloons. So again, if that's something that has helped, please share that with your staff members. That idea of sometimes just being able to visualize something just makes that kind of concept much easier to grasp, rather than kind of saying, you all need to be aware of how stressed you are. I don't know how to do that, but having something visual can be really, really beneficial. And whenever all of our training that we offer, we always make sure, and especially in the Mindful Manager course, we always want to make sure that we are offering support and tools specifically for the manager to look after themselves. So in this presentation, I really wanted to make sure that before we look at, well, what can your organisation do to make sure that you're keeping mental health and well-being front and centre? Well, what can you do for yourself personally to look after your own well-being? So we always provide a few different examples, because not all of these will work for everybody. So we try and make sure we've got a mixture of tools that hopefully there's one in here that you'll be able to take away and use yourself, or take away use with your team, share with your team. So they're all very simple and quite straightforward. But there are a couple of these that I use myself and still find them very, very beneficial. So traffic light check-in. So again, if you're feeling great, no issues, able to come in, do your work, contribute effectively, green, great. Orange is maybe you've had a few stressful conversations, a few things have gone wrong, you're okay, it's fine, not too bad, but you want to be able to get yourself back to green rather than progressing into red, where that's a sign when, okay, something, I need to change something, or before my balloon pops. So just being able to have the self-awareness to recognize within yourself, yes, I've had a stressful day. Okay, I'm going to go and walk the dog before I launch straight into making the dinner or doing this, doing X, Y, and Z. Or, okay, I can feel that was a really stressful meeting. I'm definitely right up on the top of the amber. I have another meeting in 20 minutes. I need to get myself back down into the green before I go into this meeting where I'm already one comment and I am up into the red. So being able to regulate yourself as much as possible to try and bring yourself back into the green. So again, just thinking that visualization of the traffic lights can be really helpful. And then CIA, thinking about what can I control in this situation, and that's normally I can control myself. I can control how I react to this. I can control my my actions is what I can control. Things that I can influence, I can maybe influence the tone of this conversation. I can try and bring the energy down in this conversation. I can influence maybe by bringing somebody else into this conversation. And then what is it that you have to accept? That this is just a really rude customer and I unfortunately am bearing the brunt of their rudeness. So again, that can be really freeing for people to think, okay, I have done nothing to warrant having this really rude customer, but I can control how I act. I can influence maybe by asking a manager to come over as well. So again, just having that very CIA, very quick tool that they can use and draw on when things are starting to maybe get stressful. And then 3 things that help very often, maybe when we are in the thick of some of these more stressful situations, or we've just come out of a stressful situation, it can feel like we're starting to spiral and things are getting progressively worse. We don't know how to stop that spiral, and our brain is only fixating on the spiral. It's very hard to turn your brain off to think, right, what are my tools here to help me get back to kind of normal, get back to green. So it's really helpful to have a couple of things written out. The first lockdown, on my desk I had a post-it note that had 3 things that if everything started getting too much, my brain didn't have to then think, right, how do I get myself out of this? How do I make myself feel better? It's right there. I just had to look at it. My 3 things were I could drink a glass of water. So they're all things that you can do really quickly that you know will help you bring you back to yourself, regulate your emotions a bit more. So yeah, I could drink a glass of water, I could go and stand outside, and I could do some yoga. And having that reminder there was just one less thing for my brain to have to worry about. So everybody's 3 things are going to be totally different, but it's really helpful to have them saved as a note in your phone, stuck up somewhere, so that you know that your brain doesn't have to, when your brain is maybe spiraling or you are feeling like your balloon is getting pumped full more and more with more and more air into it, right, there's something I can do straight away and that will release some of that pressure. And then something, breathing exercises. Our breath is so important. We do it without giving it much thought. And it's very often when we're in high stress or high anxiety situations, you might feel that tightness across the chest, feeling like you can't get enough air. Our breathing is really affected. So a way to really regulate yourself quite quickly and efficiently is some breathing exercises. And you can find loads of really great quick ones online that maybe have a visual aspect as well that just really helps regulate your breathing, regulate your emotions. So hopefully some of those, at least one of those, hopefully you'll be able to take away with you and use with staff or share with staff. So that's what you can do as an employee, as a manager, about looking after your own self, because that is so important to then allow you to be able to be the best manager, the best employee, the best team member that you can be. But what about your organization? What can they do to, again, really make sure that health and wellbeing and mental health is taken seriously and is front and center? So again, I've kept referring back to this positive culture towards mental health, having a shared language, knowing that you can talk openly, at least to your line manager, about your mental health. And this won't happen overnight. It may be a very long journey, but it's a journey that the whole organization needs to go on. So again, investment in workplace wellbeing, that's really vital. There's a lot of good, several reports around the return of investment if you invest X amount in your employees' health and wellbeing, and how positive that can be in keeping staff morale high, in their effectiveness and their productivity. But to make sure that that investment isn't just for one level of staff, making sure that that is training for all staff, so that everybody, it's a level playing field. Sometimes health and wellbeing, mental health training can be a bit tokenistic, a bit, right, well, we need to do this year, tick that box, run the training. And it's maybe only a certain level of staff members are there, whereas we would really encourage organisations that everybody takes part in these trainings, so that all members of staff can look around and say, oh, this organisation is really, really investing, and all levels of the organisation recognise how important health and wellbeing is, recognise the value of their staff. Then employee assistance programs, it may be that your organisation already has one. Make sure you know what it offers for yourself and also for your employees. And then policies and strategies. Does your organisation have a health and wellbeing strategy? Smaller organisations, it may be a case of, okay, we're gonna train up 3 mental health first aiders this year. It doesn't have to be bells and whistles, policies and strategies, but is there some kind of plan? Is there some kind of goal that you're working towards, or something that you're maintaining around mental health and wellbeing? And making sure that if it is a policy or a strategy, that it's not gathering dust on the shelf, that it's actually being implemented, and that it's being implemented with all staff members knowing how it is being implemented, how they can access it, what exactly the organisation is doing. Especially in this time of having coming out, hopefully the other side of COVID, really important for staff to be as well informed as possible, to try and reduce that anxiety, to try and reduce try and make sure that they don't progress towards burning out by lack of information. So some things to think about, maybe things to raise with other people within your organisation, things to get talking about, but some things for you to think about. And we as AMH Works, this is our core, this is what we do, is we work and support businesses and organisations with regards to mental health and wellbeing. So I've mentioned a few of our training courses: mental health awareness, personal resilience, burnout and rest, stress awareness. We have a few COVID specific ones like returning to the workplace. We're also we are open to developing new courses if there's something that an organisation wants specifically. Again, consultancy, if you are thinking of, we just don't know where to start with any of this. Do we need a strategy? Do we not? What do we need? We can come in a consultancy role. And then for mental health first aiders, as well as offering the training, we wanted to make sure that there was ongoing support for those first aiders. So we run a quarterly peer support network, and we're in the process of hopefully introducing an EAP that is specifically about counselling. So it may be for smaller organisations, knowing that you can purchase 6 sessions of counselling for a staff member, or knowing that you could offer that to all staff. We're hoping to launch that in the next few months. And then signposting, not only to health and wellbeing, mental health issues, but also we would get asked for information around drugs and alcohol, financial support, all kinds of different areas that are all kind of linked and connected to health and wellbeing. So we try to make sure that we're on top of who to signpost to. And that is the next slide, which is signposting. So GP is always a good protocol, but again, internally, as I've kind of said, make sure you know what your organisation offers. HR may be able to offer extra support to these employees. And then there's a list of some voluntary sector organisations. The Here to Help app, the little red square there, is very handy. You can have it in your phone, have it search through. If there's something specific, it's there. And again, Google is also very good. The last link on the bottom of the screen is a really useful resource. They're specific to each trust area. You can print them off, display them, and it lists out all the relevant kind of mental health support services in that area. I know that there is a follow-up document with this course, and I'll include all those signposting details so that you can have them. Again, the Smartens and Lifeline, if you can print out some posters, display those in kind of common areas. You just don't know the impact or how effective that displaying those numbers can be. But again, and it's all these little small things that really add up and work towards a kind of bigger goal that we've been talking about of having a positive culture within your organisation towards mental health. Again, it's not going to happen overnight, but even the fact that you're here and listening to find out more about how you can support your colleagues and your teams, that again is another step towards creating that more positive culture. If there's anything, if you'd like more information about any of our courses or any of the support that we offer, or if there's something, if I can signpost you somewhere else, my email address is on the screen. Please feel free to get in touch with me. It's been great being able to share with you, and I'll pass back over to Roisin.
Rachel, thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation, and it's a topic which continues to attract a growing awareness for employer focus in challenging times, in supporting, I suppose, healthy workplaces, but also in dealing with some of the specific issues which we face in our industry, which you've touched on very well for someone not coming from the sector, as you've noted. You've certainly given us a taster for a topic which we hope that everyone joining us will actually dive into further. And I know that certainly, as you've outlined, there's lots of advice and guidance in there for employers to support them in putting mental health and the well-being of their employees front and centre in their operations, to support the retention strategies, but also to support the attraction of new talent in as well. For me, just some of the key takeaways that I picked up from your presentation. One, the impact of the last 2 years has undoubtedly had an impact on employee stress and well-being in the sector, and it's something that we can't ignore. Mental health and employee well-being has got to be a priority for the business. It's also vital that managers have an understanding of this area and that they're equipped with the tools to support the well-being of their teams. And there's lots of expert support to help employers in this area, which is great, such as Action Mental Health and the programs that you've outlined and other organisations that have been signposted in the presentation. We'll be sharing the slides with the details for Action Mental Health and the other support organisations as a follow-up, so that you can explore further in your own time. And just then in wrapping up, I'd also like to thank Tourism NI for supporting us to deliver this webinar series, and to all of you, thank you for attending. I hope you've gained value and insight from the session, that you're encouraged to review your own approach and focus on employee well-being in your business and what more you can do to invest in this vital area. I hope you'll join us for other webinars in the series, for which you'll find details on the webpage hatsnetwork.co.uk. And we look forward to you joining us again soon. Thank you.